Welcome to another episode of the Coffee Conversation Show powered by the Emerging India Forum, TEIF, and a tech partner, Prime Infotech Solution. Series is The Emerging Lawyer, theme is Learning the Art of Mergers. We have with us Ankit Majmudar, a seasoned legal professional and partner at Quillen Partners. With decade of experience in corporate law, private equity, mergers, and more, Ankit's journey through top tier law firms such as Vadia Gandhi, Platinum Partners has shaped his unique approach to law and leadership. So, welcome Ankit to today's coffee conversation.
Thank you.
So, I just wanted to explain you just on the format. 3 rounds. The rapid fire is a surprise round. So, let's begin. So, friends, I'm Lion Amir Virani here, host at Coffee Conversation and legal tech evangelist, and an author of 15 books. So, Ankit, my first question, what drew you to specialize in corporate law, particularly in areas like private equity and mergers?
So quite a few things. I think one, it's intellectually quite stimulating. It's not very mundane. It's you're presented with a new challenge every day. It's also a fairly developing field of law, so it's not something that's stagnating at any point. It's something that's both relatively new and developing, even more so in India, because India really, private equity, for example, is more the feature of the last, call it 2 decades or so. I think before that, we didn't even have the concept of private equity in India. And in the last 2 decades, it's grown substantially. So as an example of a field within corporate law, I think private equity is a good example of something that has developed very closely along with the liberalization and development of the Indian economy. You see much more progress there, complexity there, opportunities, all of that put together. So these are elements which obviously attract anybody, and including myself. And that's why I felt both corporate law and in particular M&A and private equity and corporate law were good fields to specialize in.
Wow. So, Ankitji, what are the key points to be considered while working on an M&A deal or case?
So I think from a client, one has to keep in mind the interest of the client, because ultimately we're in the services industry.
Yes.
It's very important to make sure that the client is A, satisfied, and B, your role as a lawyer really is to make sure that the client is protected and informed. I often tell clients that we can't tell them what to do. We can tell them what could happen if they do X or Y thing. And I think it's important, therefore, one, for the client not to be surprised. So it's important to predict what is going to happen or try to predict what's going to happen. It's also down to a considerable amount of preparation and hard work. And hard work is a theme that I think pretty much runs through this profession, where one has to continuously put in a great deal of effort to satisfy clients, to make sure that one is prepared for what's going to come forward. And therefore, in the context of, let's say, a large M&A transaction, preparation, being aware of what the legal position is in relation to a particular matter, the ability to be available to a client. Availability is again key for clients, and the ability to be both available and accessible in sense of being able to provide advice that's understandable easily is quite important to clients. And that runs across things, but in the context of a large M&A transaction where there's enough layers of complexity, the ability to peel them down to the essence of the transaction, I think, would help matters a lot.
Wow, perfectly explained. Now, Ankitji, how do you handle the complexity of cross-border mergers and acquisitions, especially with the ever-evolving regulations that have come in place?
That's a very good question. I think what we have seen as a trend in the last few years is considerable increase in the level of regulatory scrutiny, involvement on the part of regulators, not just in India, but globally. Antitrust is a classic example. We are seeing US regulators, Indian regulators, everybody take a much more aggressive and, I would say, to some degree, call it interfering, call it involved positions in relation to transactions. A part of it obviously is justified on the basis of the way companies have behaved. It's also justified on the basis of the fact that we have various industries that are quite new. So technology services, again, is a classic example. If you take a Google or a Microsoft, those companies were not even in existence some decades ago. So it's also novel in terms of the kind of impact these industries have. Take Twitter, for example, or X, or whatever you call it. The impact that can have on the economy, on the world, on social situations is quite large. And therefore, regulators tend to get involved in those situations more than they used to before. So as a lawyer, our role is no longer merely confined to looking at Indian regulations. Very often, while we can't legally advise on them, we need to be familiar with what is to be expected in, let's say, a large jurisdiction like the US or the UK or things like that. And it's obviously useful to a client to have somebody who's had some degree of experience of these transactions in the past. So knowledge of regulations is quite important. Familiarity with them is useful. I think, again, the willingness to put in the extra effort to figure out what is expected to happen is very important. again, like I said, clients don't like surprises. What they want to know, they're okay with telling them upfront this is a problem, as long as, of course, you come up with a solution as well. But it's even more important to them to flag the problem than it is to flag the solution, because the solution is good news. Clients want bad news upfront. So I think it's important to put in the effort to figure out what is predictable, what is not predictable, and warn the client in advance of that. That way, one can navigate a complex transaction quite easily. And one has to keep in mind there is complex and there's complicated, and transactions are often complicated without being complex. So one has to jump to a lot of hoops, but it's a lot of effort, but it's not too much complexity there. Whereas if one goes into questions of how to interpret regulations and things like that, it's much more mind at work than it is in merely in terms of ticking the boxes.
Wow, perfectly explained. Now, my next question will be, what's your perspective on the changing landscape of private equity in India, and how do you see it evolving in the future?
So private equity in India is, like I said, not that old. But if you look at the way the market has evolved, it's broadly divided now into three sections. You've got the venture capital tier at the bottom, which is effectively people who are looking at servicing startups, making early stage investments, angel investments, things like that. You've got the mid market, which is now more growth capital oriented. Typically, we tend to see more local funds there, local funds with offshore funds, but with offshore money, but local funds, locally managed funds. And then you've got the buyout space, which is a mixture of local funds and international global funds. The good part of it is, I think, as a market, India has evolved a great deal from where it started off. And we are now, in most respects, I would say, largely at par with the rest of the world in terms of the kind of players who are in the market. Size of transactions has increased a lot. Complexity of transactions has increased a lot. And there are things which there are elements that weren't even there earlier. For example, one of the elements of a typical buyer transaction is leverage. And India, for the longest time, did not even have a concept of using leverage. Now, leverage is very common. Similarly, the concept of how you structure funds, let's say fund formation. Fund formation in India is, again, a fairly novel and new industry. What's happened in the past has been very basic funds being formed. Now we are adopting global practices and starting to form more and more complicated funds, continuation funds, all the sort of vehicles which were in there before. So it's an industry which has seen a tremendous amount of growth. I suspect in the next few years, it will continue to see phenomenal growth. I think also it is an industry which is clearly quite lucrative from a client perspective. But I think it's also important to see the elements that they add to the economy as a whole. For example, the fact that you can provide liquidity in situations where a particular company can't go to the public markets is a significant plus. I think they also contribute in relation to cost efficiencies. Obviously, they are quite focused on the bottom line, which to some degree helps in making sure companies are run in a more profitable fashion. So there is, of course, an ongoing debate as to whether private equity is good for the world or not. But without going into the morality of it, I think there are certain elements which certainly add value to the country as a whole.
Wow. So now, continue conversation with your experience in corporate governance. What are the key aspects companies overlook when navigating legal risks?
So again, I think it's not so much down to which aspects, but I think it's which aspects at which point of time. So one of the things that we noticed is that if the economy is doing very well and there is tremendous amount of activity, there is what I like to call deal heat, which is people get into a situation where they desperately want to do a deal because it's either FOMO or it's a fear that you're going to, if you don't do a deal, you won't be relevant or whatever you want to call it. So there's an eagerness to do a transaction, and that sometimes we find, and again, I would qualify this by saying that as lawyers, we are the worst investors ever because we only see risk, we never see reward. But having said that, I think it's important to keep in mind the fact that at any point of time, the risks remain the same. So it's not that simply because the world is doing very well, the risk around regulatory risks around pollution, risks around pricing, those go away. Those continue to remain. And to some degree, it's worse in these times because when you're paying the full price, it obviously means you're not budgeting for those risks. So our philosophy is that in the context of any transaction, the more good the transaction looks from the outside, and therefore the higher the price you're paying, the higher the degree of risk, and therefore the higher the degree of scrutiny that one has to put in to make sure that you are able to see these risks before they emerge and bite you without you realizing it. So I think preparing for those sort of situations and being able to diligence those risks very carefully is key for these sorts of transactions to go through.
Wow. So now, Ankit, how do you balance the demands of arbitration with your corporate advisory work, especially in high stake cases?
So it's not easy, I must confess. I think it's quite hard to combine litigation and non-litigation practice, and I tend to, I would say, focus more on the non-litigation side of things. But what I have realized is that one, arbitration, unlike litigation, because of the fact that it's a little more flexible in terms of hearing times and things like that, one is able to manage things better. Second, I think it's also very useful to be able to combine the perspectives of litigation and non-litigation, because it's very possible to sit and do chamber practice where you sit in a room and draft documents, but you're drafting in a vacuum. Unless you've seen those documents being tested in court, it means very little. Equally, one can be a great litigator, one can know a lot about the pure thesis of law, but unless you've seen the practicality of it and how companies implement it on a day-to-day basis and how agreements are read and what sort of structures are put in place, it's hard to litigate over those unless you're familiar with them. So I think the ability to manage both or be involved in both is a huge plus for a lawyer. And I think it's very important for anybody who gets into this profession to be willing to and able to spend at least some time in court, in litigation, in arbitration, alongside doing a corporate practice. And equally, I think somebody who goes into litigation and arbitration should spend some time in the corporate world as well. The fusion of the two, I think, adds a great deal of value.
Very true, very true. Now, continuing, what trends do you see emerging in the fields of commercial litigation and intellectual property, sir?
So what we do see is intellectual property becoming, again, more complicated, more global. Typically, companies which are looking at buying intellectual property assets today buy them on a worldwide basis. They need to then think about structuring how those assets are located, what is the best way of licensing them, using them, exploiting them, all of that. Litigation, on the other hand, is becoming to a degree more global, but I would say much more expensive more than anything else than it used to be. I think India is probably at some level and in some respects the most expensive legal market one can think of on the litigation side. At the same time, on the sort of corporate law side, it's probably one of the most inexpensive ones. So it's a very odd dichotomy there. But in the Indian context, I think the level of cost and time that goes into litigation is a very big challenge. While the trends of today indicate that people are going for arbitration more than litigation, and at least at some level that's helped the courts to reduce their workload, we still don't see in the longer term great deal of certainty around the fact that litigation costs or timings will come down. The focus that most people have and continue to have today is focus on interim relief, forget about final relief, because final relief will come when your grandchildren are fighting over the matter, so why bother about it? And that unfortunately remains the case even today. I think I'm optimistic that in time it'll with AI and with all else that comes with technology and all of that stuff, I think things will become a little easier. But it will clearly take a great deal of time, systems, effort to be able to get there.
Yes, yes, sir. Now, Ankit ji, how has the leadership evolved over the years working from different law firms and now at your law firm, Quilling Partners?
So I was quite lucky in some ways that I had very good mentors in my early stages, and I saw, I think Vadya Gandhi, which is where I started my legal work, is a fantastic place, absolutely marvelous place to work, and great place for training. I think we also had the good fortune of having very good senior partners at that point of time who were able to guide us in the right direction, and more than anything else, give us opportunities which frankly were not available elsewhere. So, for example, when I was in Vadya Gandhi, I was sent to Bangalore to start the Bangalore office, literally after 4 years or 3.5 years, something like that sort. Now, in today's day and age, I question myself as to why would anybody do that. But the fact that they were willing to go out there and say, fine, punt on a chap like this and send him off somewhere to start something is quite remarkable.
Yes,
I
yes.
think it's also a great learning because you learn that one, if you're given responsibility, you probably will be able to run with it. Two, you learn also how to deal with people, which I think is absolutely critical. I think the learning that I've had there in terms of culture, how to make sure that you treat people well, you keep people happy, you treat people, whether they're staff, associates, whoever else, partners, everybody else is sort of kept in a manner where they like to come to office rather than dislike coming to office. Taking care of the smaller things that you can do. Sometimes, it's not so much the amount of money that matters. It's more around how you take care of people and how you deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Those are things that matter a lot. So I think those are elements of leadership which were taught to us at a fairly early stage. I think those have helped a lot of us who were sort of that generation or that ilk, were lucky enough to have seniors like that. So it's helped them out quite well in the future as well.
Very true, very true. Your people skills, I can see. I mean, that has brought a smile on you when you were talking about people management. So, hats off, sir. Yeah. So now, as a partner at Quillen Partners, what are the key challenges you face managing large corporate clients?
So I think client expectations are obviously very high and continue to get higher and higher. I think in part we have technology to blame. technology credit. Like an example I would give is WhatsApp. I think WhatsApp is more the boon and the bane of lawyers, because there's an expectation to be available at all hours. There's an expectation to respond within seconds. There are groups all over the place. It's very difficult to keep track of those groups. But at the same time, technology improves efficiency a great deal as well. So, we use technological tools today which weren't even there when we started practice, when I certainly started practice 25 years back. So to take an example, there are softwares today which, like Workshare and so on, which allow for us to compare documents in seconds. When we started practice, you literally had typewriters at that point of time, and you had to have typists sort of type out each change and in a different color and strike it through in a different color and things like that. So it's quite astonishing and how far we have come. At the same time, it's quite overwhelming at times because, like I said, availability is a big factor. From a health perspective, it's not a great position to be in. This profession takes a toll on your health by any means. And it's quite hard to be not just available all the time, but on top of things all the time. You need to be on top of the legal profession, you need to be on top of professional responsibilities. If you're in management in a firm, you need to be ready to take on management responsibilities as well. It's all of those put together. So those are significant challenges. And I think while there is a perception externally that the legal profession is great and being a partner in a law firm is great. It is great in certain respects. It is immensely challenging in other respects. And I think it's only once people have gone through this that they realize the challenges flow along with the good stuff, which, to be fair, I think is with most things in life. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So it is something that one goes with the other.
Yes. Now my serious question. What legacy would you like to leave behind as Ankit Majmudar?
To be honest, that is one aspect that I have not devoted much thought to at all.
I know. So
Frankly,
that's why we have this question for senior partners like you to start thinking.
So look, honestly, my view is that whatever we do, in the grand scheme of things, is sort of kind of irrelevant. I think it's good to feel relevant for a while, but the fact is, all of us over time will become less and less important. I think you could be a Lincoln, you could be anybody, but over time, whatever as great as your efforts and your contributions could be, over time, there are better people, there are greater people, all of that. I would simply leave it as this. I think if people consider me to have been a reasonably good chap, I would be quite happy with that.
Wow. So now my last question for your professional journey. What advice would you give to young lawyers aspiring to reach partner level at prestigious firms like Quillen Partners and others?
Work hard. Work really, really, really hard. Unfortunately, that's the one element that you can't substitute in any respect. You could be the most brilliant man on earth. It doesn't matter. You need to really work hard. I think being willing to accept responsibility, being willing to accept ownership and take responsibility is, again, a very important part of that development. Learning and continuously learning and being willing to and open to learn is another element, because many of us reach a point where we think we know everything, where we don't know everything. There's very little that we know about. It's also important to bear in mind that, and I think it's a perspective that comes over time, that we get very involved in our professions and we think that this is all that there is to life and work is the only thing. Like I said, working hard is very important. Work is a very significant aspect, but there are more things to life, and many of those things contribute to your work as well. Your ability to interact well with people is something that will contribute to your professional life also. Your ability to know about things that are more than just the law will contribute to your professional life as well. So I think keeping in mind all of those elements is quite important in deciding how you want to plan your paths to development in a law firm. And I finally said, look, don't take it too seriously. I mean, whether you become a partner in 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, in the grand scheme of life, it doesn't matter.
Wow. Beautifully summarized. Now let's continue the conversation and go to the next round. The personal one, understand Ankit as a person. Tell us about your family and your formative year, Ankit.
So I've been quite lucky in that respect that I had tremendous support from my family. To take an example, I came to Bombay in 2000, and I lived with my grandparents for the longest time, and they were extremely kind in taking care of me at that stage, because I used to work obscene hours, and I was a tremendous burden on them because I used to come home at all kinds of hours, and obviously at their age it was quite painful. But they bore it very well, and they bore it with a smile, and I think I owe them a great deal around that. Also the rest of my family, parents, siblings, cousins, uncles. I've been very lucky in that respect. I think many of them have contributed to making the good parts of what I am, whatever little it is.
Wow. So let's go back to your Baldwin Boys School and National Law School of India. How did it shape your values and interest outside of work?
I think the company you keep and the friends you make in these institutions adds a lot to you as a person. I think National Law School, for example, I think in many respects shapes you both personally and professionally. I think school years are important because school years give you the basis of your morality, your outlook to life in a way, and gives you certain very close friendships. I think once you get to a slightly older stage and you begin at a more mature stage and begin to go to college, I think it's useful to be exposed to other elements as well. I think NLS does that quite well because it gives you it's a hostel accommodation, so you need to live in the hostel, which I think is great. I think everybody should ideally have the experience of being able to live in hostel for a couple of years. It removes insecurities, it exposes you to other people, it exposes you to what life is about, problems, good things, bad things, all of that. And I think both those institutions, therefore, have helped me a great deal in terms of shaping not just my outlook towards work, but outlook towards life in general. And keeping, to some degree, it also helps you keeping yourself on the ground because you deal with people who are obviously much more intelligent than you are. And that tends to keep you quite grounded.
Wow. So now, what does a weekend look for Ankit?
Oh, that's a good question. It's been some time. Weekends are, okay, like I said, in this profession, there's no substitute for hard work, unfortunately. So weekends tend to be less available than they used to be. But I'm not I'm not a party animal. I don't go out and sort of go out every night, things like that. So it's more a quiet weekend is probably the way I describe most of my weekends.
Wow. So, what is your favorite way to relax and disconnect from your professional and personal responsibilities?
I have a very curious hobby, which is playing Lego.
Hmm.
I find that immensely distracting. So there are these sort of more complicated sets that come out with mechanicals in it and all. And I'm quite fascinated by some of those. So I find that quite distracting because once you get, they take whatever 8-9 hours to do, and if you start them, it distills your mind from everything else, which I think is very good. It's like I said, it's very important to keep more than just a work perspective in your mind. This is also, like I said, a very stressful profession.
Yes.
It's good to have something that you can cut off from the rest of the stress for.
Yes, as you said earlier, yes. So that's a good way of cutting off, relaxing, de-stressing, and balancing, and making your mind more refreshed and active the next day. That's a perfect way of your thing. New thing I've discovered, Ankit. So now, what role does travel play in your life, and which is the favorite destination that you'd like to visit, or some memories from your traveling?
So travel is, for good or for bad, quite an important aspect of what I do. So I split my time between Bombay and Bangalore. So obviously I travel a great deal between the two cities. I generally like travel because it again gives you much more experiences. You see a lot, you learn a lot, you experience a lot. So within limits, I think travel is great. I would I would struggle to say a favorite destination. I think that varies with time. There have been some great locations that I can think of. For example, there's Pench where I go sometimes for safaris. There's Goa, obviously, for the beaches. I just went to the Andaman some time back, and again a very nice untouched place to visit. So I don't think I would call it a favorite place, but I would say every time you go to a different place, and sometimes over time as well, you find places changing and evolving. And it's very useful to see the comparisons between each place, how cultures vary, how people vary, how architecture varies, things like that. So the elements of differences between each location, I think, are what draws me to travel.
Wow. Okay. So, are there any particular books, movies, or music that inspires you?
Music, well, I'm not a great. I listen to music, sure, but I'm not a great music guy. I don't keep track of what I listen to. Books, I think Woodhouse is somebody who I admire a great deal. Again, it's probably because of the fact that it's a huge de-stressor for me. I find his play on language delightful. And it's certainly something that I have used alongside Lego to de-stress in various circumstances. Uh, there are other ones as well. There are, let's say, Frank Richards and books of those sides, which I find interesting. I would say I like the lighter side of things rather than the heavier stuff. So I don't read a Tolstoy. I prefer a Woodhouse or Tolstoy any day.
Wow. Now, my next curiosity question, since you're Bengali, tell us something about your. Huh?
Gujarati.
You're Gujarati? Then my mistake, sir. Apologies. Majmudar and Majumdar. That's why I confused. Are you Gujarati or side? So let me talk to you about. So, Tamari favorite Gujarati dish. Something about what you like in Gujarati cuisine.
I think. Well, I would say uddiyo is probably one of my favorite dishes. I think it's so hardcore Gujarati that you can't get more Gujarati than that.
Yes.
I think I would put that as being quite a high up on the list. I used to be biased towards sweets, but I think on the sweet side, I find ice creams and things like that much more attractive. So I'd say on the Gujarati side, uddiyo is probably my favorite dish.
Perfect. Interesting. Okay, my last question. Describe Ankit in one line.
Ball of stress.
Okay, let's go and have some fun. The rapid fire round. Your morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
Okay. Best piece of advice you have ever received?
Don't take anything too seriously.
Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay, let's go. Your go-to comfort food?
Ice cream.
Wow. I was expecting you. Okay. Your favorite color?
Blue.
Mergers or private equity?
Private equity.
Okay. The last book you read or movie you watched?
Oh, good question. Books, I suppose the last one I read was Smith by Woodhouse. That's probably something I read quite recently. Movies wise, not a great movie guy. TV guy, yes, not so much of a movie guy. Last time I remember, frankly, is probably the new Top Gun movie. I don't remember anything after that.
Okay, it's fine. You did well, and you get this book, which will be sent to you as a Diwali gift, autograph. And please go through, and we would definitely like to, if possible, hand it in person. But Diwali time, we'll work it out. So, friends, it was a lovely conversation pre-Diwali, which we had. So happy Diwali to everyone, and it was interesting conversation, learning from Ankit Majmudar about how he has mastered the art of mergers and acquisitions. So this episode, whoever legal professional lawyers upcoming, do watch this episode. You'll learn a lot, and he's a senior legal professional, and he has evolved over the years. He is, what do you say, team friendly, learned a lot through his conversations, learned about his unique unique way of de-stressing, Lego playing 8 hours he can go. That is very interesting. Yes, we need this world of legal industry is very demanding, and he has his unique ways of de-stressing and relaxing and then coming back refreshed. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. There are a lot of 200 plus episodes. You will get inspired, learn. If you want to be featured as a guest speaker, visit our social media and our team will connect with you. So happy Diwali once again, and we connect with another speaker, have lovely coffee conversations over a cup of coffee. Thank you.